He leaned forward on that elevated bench, looked down at the man standing in shackles, and spoke with the casual cruelty of someone who had done this 100 times before. "You think this courtroom is your friend, Mr. Caldwell? It isn't. It never was. Men like you are a disease this city needs cut out." The gavel came down like a hammer on stone, sharp, final, absolute. Judge Raymond Calloway had built his entire career on moments exactly like this one. He was the law. He was the verdict before the trial even started. He was untouchable, and every person in that courtroom knew it. But there was one thing Judge Raymond Calloway had never once considered during his long and profitable run at the top. What happens when the man you're trying to destroy has already built the cage around you, and you walked into it yourself? Because the man standing before him in those county-issued orange scrubs was not Marcus Caldwell, small-time contractor, nobody from out of town, easy mark with no family connections and no political cover. The man standing in those shackles was Special Agent in Charge Darius Cole, decorated 20-year veteran of the FBI, the newly appointed director of the Bureau's National Judicial Corruption Division, and the architect of the most sophisticated judicial sting operation in American federal law enforcement history. Every humiliation Calloway had heaped onto that man in the last 48 hours had been recorded, catalogued, and was currently being reviewed by the United States Attorney General herself. The judge hadn't sentenced a criminal today. He had sentenced himself. He just didn't know it yet. To understand how a federal agent ends up in shackles by design, you have to go back 18 months to a cramped, windowless conference room on the 4th floor of the FBI's field office in Washington, D.C. The kind of room where the fluorescent lights flicker and the coffee is always burned and the case files on the whiteboard make your stomach drop. Darius Cole had been running the Judicial Corruption Division for just under 3 weeks, when a junior analyst named Priya Voss placed a manila folder on his desk and said simply, "You're going to want to read this one before you touch anything else." Cole opened it. He read it twice. Then he locked his office door and read it a third time. What the file described was not a single corrupt judge, or a local extortion ring, or a city councilman skimming from a construction budget. What the file described was an organized, hierarchical criminal enterprise that had burrowed so deeply into the judicial infrastructure of the Midwest that it had effectively become part of the infrastructure itself. At the top of the web sat Calloway, Judge Raymond Calloway of the Northern District of Illinois, a man with 17 years on the federal bench, 3 honorary law degrees, and a self-righteous, thunderous courtroom persona that made juries feel they were in the presence of divine justice itself. Beneath Calloway sat a network of corrupted clerks, a handful of compromised local prosecutors, 2 sitting aldermen, and a defense attorney named Gerald Spitz, whose billing records had never once matched his actual case outcomes in any rational way. The operation was elegant in its simplicity. Calloway controlled the docket. He decided which cases moved fast and which cases stalled for years. He decided which motions got buried under procedural technicalities and which ones sailed through. Defense attorneys who paid Spitz the right retainer found their clients' charges quietly reduced, their evidence suppressed on whisper-thin legal grounds, their sentences handed down with sudden, inexplicable leniency. Corporations facing federal fraud exposure hired Spitz and watched their civil liability evaporate inside Calloway's courtroom like morning dew. Meanwhile, anyone who couldn't pay, anyone who walked into that courtroom without resources, without connections, without a face that fit the system's preferred image, got the full theatrical weight of Calloway's manufactured righteousness dropped on their head. He made examples of the powerless to camouflage what he was doing for the powerful. The Bureau had been circling Calloway for years. 3 separate investigations had come close. 3 separate times, the evidence trail had gone cold in ways that weren't coincidental. Witnesses recanted. Hard drives failed. A wiretap order got mysteriously delayed in processing for 11 weeks until the window closed. Calloway was connected enough, careful enough, and arrogant enough to have survived every approach. The traditional methods weren't working. What Cole realized reading Priya Voss's folder at 11:30 on a Tuesday night was that the only way to catch a man who had learned to detect every conventional trap was to build a trap that looked nothing like a trap at all. You couldn't chase Calloway, you had to make Calloway come to you. Cole spent the next 6 weeks designing the operation from the ground up. The judge only moved when he felt completely safe. He only reached when the target looked completely helpless. Cole needed to build a target so perfectly helpless-looking that Calloway's own greed and arrogance would overpower his caution. He needed someone Calloway would select on his own without prompting, convinced that the decision was entirely his idea. Cole needed a ghost, a fictitious identity built with enough texture to feel real, planted in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, and designed to trigger every predatory instinct the judge possessed. And then Cole decided to become that ghost himself. The pushback from his team was immediate and fierce. His deputy director called it reckless. The Bureau's legal counsel called it legally precarious. His second-in-command, Agent Yolanda Marsh, sat across from him in his office for 2 hours and laid out every scenario in which this operation could collapse, every point at which the personal risk to Cole became untenable, every way a federal judge with connections to sitting politicians could turn an undercover operation into a career-ending fiasco. Cole listened to all of it. He nodded at the right moments. And then he said, "Everything you just described is exactly why it has to be me. Because if something goes wrong, I'm the most qualified person in this building to manage it from the inside." Nobody in that room had a clean answer to that. The identity they built for him took 11 weeks. Marcus Caldwell was constructed with the kind of painstaking attention to detail that intelligence operations reserve for the deepest covers, a Chicago-based independent contractor, mid-40s, no permanent roots in the city, working a city municipal renovation project on a short-term subcontract. His rental apartment was real, his truck was registered. His union card was backdated through a cooperative contact. His credit history had 3 years of unremarkable depth. He had no family in the city, no attorney on retainer, no political connections, nothing that would cause a man like Calloway to hesitate. He was, on every piece of paper, the kind of person the system was designed to chew through without leaving a mark. Cole moved into the South Side apartment on a Thursday in February. He drove the truck to the worksite every morning. He ate lunch at the same diner 3 blocks from the job. He was building the visible footprint of a man who didn't matter to anyone important, because the most dangerous predators always watch before they strike. And Calloway's people watched the city constantly. The judge didn't just react to opportunity, he cultivated it. He had informants in the city contracting office, contacts in the local police precincts, and a clerk in the court system named Donovan Rees, who served as his primary early warning system and talent scout. Cole had identified Rees 4 months earlier from a pattern of anomalous case file access that didn't match any legitimate judicial function. Rees was the tripwire. Cole walked directly across it. By the 6th week of the operation, Calloway had noticed Marcus Caldwell, not because Cole had done anything overtly suspicious, but because the judge's network had flagged the municipal project as a useful pressure point. There was real money moving through that renovation contract, real city funds, and real opportunities for the kind of narrative manipulation Calloway specialized in. When federal investigators began circling Gerald Spitz's financial records in early spring, Calloway needed a counter-narrative fast. He needed a story that fit the headlines, fit the prejudices, fit the assumptions the media and the public would absorb without asking follow-up questions. Cole watched from inside the operation as Calloway's network quietly zeroed in on the ghost he had spent 6 months building. He felt the trap tightening. He let it tighten, because every move Calloway made toward Marcus Caldwell was a move that Darius Cole and the Bureau were documenting in real time. The arrest came on a wet Wednesday night. Cole had known it was coming. His team had intercepted enough of the internal communications to predict the timeline within a 48-hour window. He had spent the previous 3 days reviewing every detail of the plan, running scenarios with Yolanda Marsh through a secure satellite link, and doing something that no tactical briefing document had ever adequately prepared him for. Mentally rehearsing what it would feel like to be handcuffed by corrupt police officers on a public street and thrown in the back of a squad car, knowing that the Bureau couldn't intervene without burning the entire operation. The officers who pulled him over that night weren't random. Detective Frank Ruello was Calloway's most reliable enforcement asset, a 22-year veteran who had supplemented his pension with Calloway's money for the better part of a decade. He stepped out of the lead cruiser, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who already knew how the evening ended. Cole kept his hands on the wheel, and his eyes forward, and his expression carefully calibrated to convey the particular kind of terrified confusion that innocent people show when they suddenly find themselves at the center of something they don't understand. It was the most important performance of his career. The cash was already in the trunk. Cole hadn't put it there. He had known it would be there. The intercepted communications had given him a 2-day window. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it physically are 2 different things. And when the second officer unzipped that duffel bag and held it up under the sodium lights with the kind of theatrical precision that had clearly been rehearsed, Cole felt something cold and clarifying settle in his chest. This was what it felt like to be framed. This was what it felt like to stand on a public street with your hands behind your back, while officers manufactured the story of your guilt in real time, confident that no one was coming to contradict them. He had spent 20 years investigating exactly this. Standing inside it was different. Standing inside it was something he would not forget. He was processed at the county facility, booked under the Marcus Caldwell identity, and placed in a holding cell that smelled of industrial disinfectant and old fear. He kept his posture soft, his affect low, his interaction with other detainees minimal and unthreatening. The guard who processed his intake paperwork treated him with the efficient indifference of someone moving cargo. Cole noted everything: the sounds of the facility, the rhythms of the guard rotations, the specific ways in which the physical environment was designed, whether consciously or not, to erode a person's sense of self. He filed it all away. The arraignment was the first time he was in the same room as Calloway. The judge swept in with the unhurried authority of someone who had never once experienced a morning they didn't fully control. Black robes settled perfectly, bearing effortlessly composed, voice already at its full resonant pitch before he had taken his seat. Cole watched him from the defense table and saw, with the practiced eye of an investigator who had studied this man for 18 months, exactly what Calloway was. He was a performer. He had been performing for so long, in front of audiences, so conditioned to believe the performance, that he had entirely lost the ability to see himself from the outside. He had confused the costume for the substance. He thought the robe made him the law. He had never once considered that the law might be watching him from inside the room. Bail was denied, as Cole had anticipated. Calloway delivered the denial with the kind of elaborate moral framing that was his signature. Rhetoric about community safety and flight risk, and the staggering audacity of the alleged crime, none of which had any genuine legal grounding, all of which landed exactly as intended on the gallery of court reporters and curious observers. Cole accepted the denial without expression. He was remanded to county. The performance continued. The days inside the maximum security wing of Cook County were the operational core of everything Cole had planned, and they were also, in a way he hadn't fully anticipated, genuinely hard. Not because the physical conditions broke him, he had been through far worse in his career, but because isolation at that depth does something to the human nervous system that no amount of professional preparation can fully inoculate against. He was cut off from his team, except for the carefully managed visitation channel. He was surrounded by the sounds and rhythms of a facility that processed human beings as institutional problems to be managed rather than citizens to be protected. Yolanda Marsh came through the visitation channel on day 7, wearing the tailored grey suit of a public defender who had clearly billed more hours than this case suggested. She slid a folder through the document slot. To the cameras, it was legal documents. To Cole, it was the operational update he had been waiting for. He scanned it and registered 3 things in sequence. First, that Calloway had made contact with Spitz the night of the arraignment. Second, that their conversation had been captured by a surveillance unit positioned across the street from the restaurant. And third, that Calloway had said on tape, with the relaxed candor of a man who believed himself completely secure, that the Caldwell arrest would give federal investigators enough to chase for 2 years while the offshore transfers moved forward. He had named the account structure. He had named the timeline. He had, in the expansive confidence of his own perceived invulnerability, handed the Bureau the confession that would end him. Cole authorized the next phase. Do not touch Ruello. Do not approach Spitz. Do not move on anyone in the network. Let Calloway schedule the trial. Let him build the stage. The bigger the audience he assembles for what he thinks is a public execution, the more complete and permanent the reckoning becomes when the execution doesn't go as planned. Calloway fast-tracked the trial with the enthusiasm of a man who had confused a cage he built for his prey with a stage he built for himself. He called in favors from the scheduling office. He hand-selected the prosecution, a sharp, aggressive assistant state's attorney named Brennan, who was genuinely talented, genuinely ambitious, and had absolutely no idea he was being used as a prop in a federal operation. Calloway wanted an audience. He wanted cameras. He wanted the kind of high-profile public verdict that would saturate the local news cycle for days and give him a headline to wave at anyone who might be getting too close to his financial records. He got all of it. He was the one who arranged it. The courtroom on the morning of trial was packed with the particular energy of a city that had decided it already knew the ending. The press benches were full. The gallery hummed with the low-frequency anticipation of people who had seen enough of Calloway's courtroom to know that defendants who came through without resources generally didn't come out well. Cole sat at the defense table in the county-issued grey suit they had smuggled in through the legal channel. His posture was perfect, perfectly defeated. Shoulders curved inward just slightly. Hands folded on the table, eyes appropriately downcast. He was performing the last scene of the first act. The second act was entirely his. Brennan built the prosecution case with genuine skill. The doctored financial records were presented cleanly. The audio recordings were spliced with enough contextual plausibility that they landed hard on the jury. And then Ruello took the stand, and Cole watched the detective perform his version of the truth with the smooth, unbothered competence of a man who had done it many times before. Ruello described the traffic stop with clinical precision. He described the cash in the trunk with the practiced emotional texture of outraged civic virtue. He described Marcus Caldwell's protestations of innocence with the specific kind of world-weary dismissal that juries are wired to read as confirmation of guilt. The jury watched, the reporters wrote. Calloway sat on his elevated bench and radiated the satisfaction of a performance going exactly on script. The public defender, actually federal prosecutor James Ashby, playing the role of his career in a $200 suit from a consignment store, mounted a cross-examination designed to appear weak enough to be ineffective. He fumbled with his notes. He asked tentative questions. He sustained a string of objections without apparent resistance. The jury's body language shifted collectively toward the prosecution. Calloway's composure was that of a man watching a predetermined machine do exactly what predetermined machines do. He allowed himself, behind the architecture of his judicial authority, to briefly savor it. When Achakabe said, "No further questions, Your Honor," Calloway turned to the defense table with the expression of a man delivering mercy he hadn't been asked to provide. "Mr. Caldwell." His voice carried the specific tonal quality of theatrical sorrow he reserved for defendants he had already decided were guilty. "I assume the defense rests?" The courtroom was quiet in the way courtrooms get quiet when they think they already know what's coming. The reporters were already drafting their leads. The jury had already settled into the body language of people approaching a conclusion. And then the thing happened that nobody in that room, except for 3 federal agents and 1 deputy director stationed at key points around the building, was prepared for. Cole placed both hands flat on the table, not defensively, deliberately. He pushed himself to his feet with the controlled, unhurried movement of someone who is not standing up because they've been asked to, someone who is standing up because they've decided to. The slumped posture was gone. The carefully constructed defeat was gone. Every person in that courtroom registered the change before their brains had time to name it. He was a different person than the one who had been sitting in that chair for 2 days. He had always been a different person. He had simply been waiting for the right moment to let the room see it. "Your Honor!" His voice came out at a register the gallery had not heard from that table. Not tentative, not performing grief. Clear and level and carrying the specific quality of a man who is accustomed to being listened to. "The defense does not rest. I'll be taking the stand." The murmur that went through the gallery was physical. You could feel it in the air. Calloway's expression cycled through 3 separate emotions in the space of a second. Irritation at the deviation, something adjacent to contempt. And underneath those, a hairline fracture of something he hadn't felt in this courtroom in a very long time. He pressed it down immediately. "If that's the defendant's wish, the court will accommodate it. Step forward." Cole walked to the witness stand the way he walked into every room where something important was about to happen, with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has already done the calculation and is simply moving through the steps. He placed his hand on the Bible. He met the bailiff's eyes with a calm directness that made the man shift his weight slightly without knowing why. He sat down. He did not look at his attorney. He looked directly at Raymond Calloway, and he held the judge's gaze with a steadiness that Calloway, in 17 years on that bench, had never once encountered from the defense chair. Achebe approached the podium, and the transformation in him mirrored Cole's, the fumbling incompetence of the previous 2 days, simply gone, replaced by the measured precision of someone who has been building to this moment for 18 months. "Please state your name for the record." "Darius Ellington Cole." "Mr. Cole, the prosecution has presented you to this court as a mid-level municipal contractor involved in a scheme to steal public funds. Is that an accurate description of your occupation?" Cole let a half-beat of silence fall. Not hesitation. Punctuation. "No." It is not. Then what exactly is your occupation? I am a sworn agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My designation is Special Agent in Charge, and I currently serve as Director of the National Judicial Corruption Division, operating under the direct authority of the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I have been operating undercover in this city for 7 months. I have been operating in this courtroom, in these proceedings, under that cover, for the past 3 days. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people simultaneously stops breathing. A sketch artist in the second row let her charcoal drop. The sound of it hitting the wooden floor echoed once, cleanly, in the absolute stillness. One of the jurors made an audible sound, not a word, just an involuntary exhale. The reporter in the front press bench had stopped writing. His pen was suspended above his notepad, unmoving. Galloway's face had gone grey. Not dramatically, not the theatrical pallor of a movie villain confronted by the hero. Just grey, the specific colourless grey of a man whose blood pressure has suddenly, involuntarily redirected itself toward the more urgent functions of biological self-preservation. His hand, flat on the bench in front of him, pressed down slightly, as if the wood beneath it might be the most stable thing in his world at that moment. "This is perjury," he said. His voice was lower than usual. Not commanding, not theatrical, just low. "This is an attempt to disrupt a federal proceeding. I will hold you in contempt. Bailiff!" "The purpose of my undercover assignment," Cole continued, over the judge's voice, not loud, not aggressive, simply continuing as if the objection were a technical interruption of no particular importance, was to document, corroborate, and build prosecutable federal cases against a criminal network operating within the judicial infrastructure of this district. That network has been fully documented over the course of the investigation. The documentation includes Title III wiretap intercepts, forensic accounting records cross-referenced to offshore account structures, surveillance recordings, and a sworn statement from at least one cooperating witness currently in federal protective custody. Calloway was standing now. "I am declaring a mistrial. This proceeding is. You don't have the jurisdiction to end this proceeding, Your Honor." And there it was. For the first time, not Your Honor as an honorific, Your Honor as a title that had just been separated from its meaning. Cole said it the way you'd read a label on a jar whose contents had been replaced with something entirely different. The proceeding is now a federal matter. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened at that moment. Not dramatically flung, just opened with the controlled efficiency of people who have been waiting for exactly this signal and are now executing a plan. Yolanda Marsh walked through first, followed by 11 agents in tactical gear bearing the yellow letters on dark vests that required no explanation from anyone in the room. She was holding a sealed document package that carried the weight of considerable institutional authority. The gallery erupted, not in violence, but in the collective panicked motion of 200 people simultaneously processing that the event they were watching had just changed categories entirely. Reporters were on their phones before they had cleared their seats. A sketch artist was drawing with one hand and recording audio with the other. The jury box had transformed from a deliberative body into 12 individuals, experiencing acute confusion about what their civic role now entailed. 2 agents had already positioned themselves at the private side exit that led from the bench to Calloway's chambers. The exit Cole had known the judge would move toward first, because he had reviewed the courtroom's floor plan 6 months ago and identified it as the exact point where a man of Calloway's psychological profile would instinctively seek shelter. The exit was not available. Every exit from that room was not available. Raymond Calloway looked left. He looked right. He looked at the federal agents moving into the room with the coordinated calm of people executing a thoroughly rehearsed plan, and then he looked at Darius Cole, and something in the judge's expression changed in a way that had nothing to do with performance. Cole stepped down from the witness stand. He walked toward the bench, not rushing, not performing for the cameras, just moving through the room with the steady purpose of a man finishing work he started a long time ago. He stopped a few feet from where Calloway was standing, and he looked up at the judge on his elevated platform, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only Calloway could clearly hear it. "We have the restaurant recording from the night of the arraignment. We have the routing numbers from the offshore transfers. We have Frank Ruello's signed statement. He gave it to us 22 minutes ago. We have your clerk, Donovan Reese, who has been cooperating with the Bureau for the past 11 weeks. We have 17 months of documented evidence. There is nothing left to protect, and there is nowhere left to go. It's finished." Calloway opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. What came out was not the booming baritone of Raymond Calloway, Titan of the Northern District, architect of 17 years of judicial impunity. What came out was the voice of a frightened man who had just realized, with the particular clarity that arrives only when every exit has been closed, that all of the power he believed he possessed had been borrowed from a system he had corrupted, and the system had just asked for it back. "You set me up. This is entrapment. I'll have this thrown out. I know people. You made the choice," Cole said, and there was no anger in it, no triumph, no performance, just the flat, factual weight of someone completing an accurate statement. "You identified a man you believed was defenseless. You arranged his arrest. You denied him bail. You built the prosecution. You did all of that because you decided that his powerlessness made him available to you. That was your mistake, not because he turned out to be someone different than you assumed, but because the powerlessness of the people you've been doing this to for 17 years was never a justification for any of it. You just finally chose someone who could show you that." Yolanda Marsh had arrived beside Cole. She was reading from the warrant with the brisk efficiency of someone who has memorized the words but reads them aloud anyway because the record requires it. Calloway was brought down from the bench by two agents who were careful and firm and entirely indifferent to the black robes tangling around his legs as he stepped down from the elevated platform he had occupied for 17 years, down the steps, down to the floor where everyone else stood. The press cameras were flashing in a continuous strobe. Calloway was saying something. The words were audible but had lost all coherent authority, dissolving into the noise of the room. Just sound now, without weight, without the institutional machinery that had given them their force for so long. James Eckerby appeared at Cole's shoulder, holding a tailored jacket and a gold badge on a leather credential holder, both of which had been inside a locked evidence bag in a clerk's anteroom for the duration of the trial. Cole put the jacket on. He pinned the badge to his lapel. The weight of it was familiar. He had worn it for 20 years, but that morning it had a specific gravity that he hadn't felt from it in a long time. The gravity of something earned by being willing to stand in the place where the earning happens, even when the place is a 6x8 cell in Cook County that smells like bleach and despair. "Secondary warrants," he said to Achibe, "executed 14 minutes ago, offshore accounts frozen. Spitz surrendered at the field office 40 minutes ago. The city contracting office is currently being served. Reese was taken into custody this morning before the trial began. Ruello, federal holding, cooperating fully. He knows what his options are." Cole nodded. He looked across the courtroom at the empty bench, the elevated platform, the high leather chair, the heavy gavel resting in its place. Calloway had used that chair the way certain people use height, as a substitute for the authority they couldn't generate at ground level. Without the chair, without the robes, without the orchestrated machinery of institutional deference, he was what he had always actually been, a man who had chosen, very deliberately, across 17 years and thousands of individual decisions, to use a position of public trust as a mechanism for private extraction. The choice was his. The chair hadn't made him anything. He had made the choice. Cole walked to the side exit, the one that led past the defense table, past the empty jury box, past the bar. He paused once, briefly, at the door and looked back at the room. It was a complicated room. It had been used for complicated things, some of them just, some of them not, many of them somewhere in the difficult and contested territory in between. The courtroom itself was not the problem. It never was. The room was just architecture. The problem was what certain men decided to do inside it when they believed that no one was watching, or that the watching didn't matter, or that they were positioned far enough above the machinery of accountability that the machinery couldn't reach them. The machinery had reached Calloway. It had taken 7 months and an undercover operation of significant complexity and personal cost. It had taken an agent willing to sleep in a county jail cell for 3 weeks while his team built the case around him. It had taken every piece of the operation going exactly right. That part troubled Cole because he understood something that the press coverage of the next several days would not adequately capture. A version of this case where all those things didn't align would have looked entirely different. Marcus Caldwell, the real Marcus Caldwell, whichever ordinary, unconnected person Calloway would have chosen if Cole hadn't deliberately placed himself in the target's path, would not have had a federal team waiting to flip the script, would not have had a planted prosecutor in the defense chair, would not have had wiretap recordings and forensic accounts and 11 agents in tactical vests waiting behind those double doors, would have just had the conviction, the sentence, and the long, grinding work of an appeal process that Calloway's people had been quietly sabotaging for years. That man, that real ordinary man, was the reason the operation had been worth doing. Not the arrest of Calloway, significant as it was, not the frozen accounts. The reason was the abstract but entirely real population of people who had passed through Calloway's courtroom over 17 years without resources, without connections, without anyone to notice that the system was being run against them rather than for them. You couldn't build an undercover operation for each of them individually. You could dismantle the mechanism that processed them. You could remove the man at the top and make the removal visible enough that every other Raymond Calloway, in every other courthouse, in every other district, understood that the visibility was the point. That was the work. Not glamorous, not finished. The kind of work that has no final chapter because the conditions that produce men like Calloway, the isolation of institutional authority, the erosion of meaningful oversight, the normalization of small corruptions until large ones become thinkable, those conditions are permanent features of how power operates in complex systems. They require permanent attention. Cole pushed the side door open and walked out into the main corridor of the Dirksen building. The corridor was wide and marble-floored and full of the particular ambient noise of a federal courthouse on a busy morning. Footsteps, voices, the distant rhythm of metal detectors at the entrance. He walked through it without hurrying. He had a debrief to run, warrants to review, a press statement to approve, and a phone call to make to the Deputy Attorney General before the news cycle got far enough ahead of the Bureau's official narrative to create complications. There was, as always, more work than there was time for it, and the work did not pause for satisfaction. He passed a window that looked out over the plaza below the courthouse. The morning light was flat and bright on the concrete and glass of the city, and the wind off the lake was doing what it always did in Chicago, exactly whatever it felt like, regardless of what everyone else was planning. Somewhere below, Raymond Calloway was being placed into a federal transport vehicle that would take him away from everything he had built for 17 years, away from the leverage and the architecture and the borrowed authority, into a federal holding facility where the only authority that mattered was the kind that came on paper, signed by people who were not impressed by robes or gavels or the ability to make a room go quiet. Justice, in Cole's experience, was not a feeling. It was a result. The feeling people described as justice was usually relief. The relief of a system correcting itself, of a gap between what a thing claimed to be and what it actually was finally being closed. Raymond Calloway had claimed, for 17 years, to be the embodiment of the law. He had been, for 17 years, its systematic violation. That gap was closed now. The relief was real. It did not last very long, because the next case file was already waiting. Cole took the elevator down to the main floor. The lobby was bright and busy, and full of ordinary people doing the ordinary, difficult work of moving their lives through the institutional machinery that was supposed to serve them. He walked past them toward the exit, his badge on his lapel and his mind already moving forward. The door opened ahead of him into the full, cold morning of a city that had not yet read tomorrow's news. He stepped through it. He had work to do.